Hello and welcome to our live session on building mobile apps for iOS, Android, and Windows. I'm Senior Technical Evangelist Jeremy Foster, and joining me today is an absolutely rock star panel that I think is going to facilitate a really fun conversation around this topic of cross-platform development for mobile. So I've got Senior Program Manager Ankit. How are you doing, Ankit?
I'm doing great. Nice
Good.
to be here.
Yeah. Senior Program Manager Varun Gupta.
Hi.
And Principal Program Manager Jonathan Carter.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really glad you guys are here. So let's have first of all, let's have a little bit of reflection on what we saw yesterday. Yesterday was a massive amount of information and announcements around all kinds of technologies that, if you're like me, if you're like a developer at heart, you get really excited about this stuff. So what did you guys see yesterday that maybe came out of your program, or maybe it came out of other programs that you haven't dealt very much with, but that get you excited?
I think like the VS Code going open source, I mean, that I think was really big because, that's kind of like our new investment in platforms that we basically haven't targeted in the past, like, Mac and Linux. So that going open source, and I think the love that people got from the community on that front, that would be great as we go define new experiences there. That was for me. What about you, Warren?
For me, it was the end-to-end story that, a lot of things completed the end-to-end experience for customers. For example, we had a bunch of announcements which complete end-to-end experience for customers building native apps using Xamarin. They can now build, do an automatic continuous integration in Visual Studio Online, TFS Online. They can deploy apps, securely to their enterprise, using Intune. So all these things are kind of completing the end-to-end experience where from a customer standpoint, they are getting a full experience across various things and technologies that line well together.
Yeah.
So from a customer standpoint, no matter whether they're using different vendors, they're now getting a complete end-to-end solution, and that's fantastic for me.
Yeah.
Today.
Anything you want to add, Jonathan?
Yeah, I would just say, personally, the extensibility model for both Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio Team Services was, I think, really exciting because that opens up a ton of opportunities for the community and developers to extend those products in only ways they can imagine. And then our team, it was exciting for us to, the Apache Cordova tooling that we've had in Visual Studio, to extend that, as Varun mentioned, to have a more broad end-to-end to support the DevOps investments that we have across Visual Studio Team Services. So contributing extensions to VSTS for easily building a Cordova app, as well as deployment solutions to Hockey app.
Right.
And then our team worked on this service that we released a month ago called Code Push that we're pretty excited about, that we released the open beta for, which lets you update your Cordova React Native apps without going through the store. So being able to achieve a little more agility, kind of control the end-to-end experience of how your end users get those updates, so you have a tighter, almost web-like engagement model with them. So really that kind of broadening out the development experience for Cordova apps to include the full DevOps lifecycle was really exciting for us yesterday.
Yeah. Whenever they add things, it's not just a feature, it's more like the extensibility, like you said. I guess it's kind of like being able to ask a genie for more wishes,
Yeah.
If you've got a platform now where you can make whatever you happen to need.
Yeah, exactly right.
Now, in case it wasn't explicit enough in your reactions to yesterday's announcements, why don't you let everybody know what the technologies and features and programs are that you work on specifically? Ankit, let's start with you.
So I'll start with me. So basically, I work for the C++ team. So I'm part of the Visual C++ team. I do various things there. I work on compilers, backend code generation, linkers, all kinds of tools there. Recently, with C++ now, with Microsoft, opening up to other platforms, we had a bigger investment since earlier this year, about how we can now use C++ as a solution for targeting multiple mobile platforms. Like if you take a look at historically, there's really been, before Xamarin came into the picture, JavaScript and C++ have been the cross-platform languages, right? And every platform, whether that's Android or iOS or Windows, allows you to write almost a complete C++ app out there. And some of the platform-defining apps like Minecraft, Jetpack Joyride, Skype, these apps that are there and millions of people use every day, whether for entertainment or whether for communication purposes, they're written in C++. And so one of our big investments is basically in that space, right? So with Visual C++, in the last year, we've released technology there to be able to now write a mobile app that targets all these three platforms, iOS, Android, Windows, using one IDE. We provide a great debugging experience, great IntelliSense experience. And that's really one of our bigger investments. Something else that we've been working on is basically, we've now been opening up to Linux developers as well. On the Linux platform, C++ as a language is really, really popular. And even in the IoT space, C++ seems to be the front runner in that space as well. So, opening up technologies for that. I mean, there's a blog that we posted on, VC blog about how we can now basically use Visual Studio to remotely deploy and debug Linux applications. So that's really big, and we've got a lot of love from the community there as well on that front. Another big news that we're doing as a part of our cross-platform mobile effort is that some of these apps, like the apps that I just mentioned, like Minecraft or Bing Maps, they have a Java piece of code as well. So if you look at the typical Android app, it has Java and C++ both. The apps that we're targeting are like 80% majority C++ with some Java code. And now with 2015 update 1 RTM that goes out later in this month, essentially we've enabled the experience also for Java developers to be able to use Visual Studio. So they can actually now use Java language services. They can author beautiful code. Enjoy all the features that they enjoy today. The productivity of Visual Studio for Java, for authoring Java code, also debugging Java code. And hence, it's really a complete story there.
Okay, so basically, each of you on the panel today is representing cross-platform strategy, but it's a different and complementary cross-platform strategy.
That's right, yeah.
And yours is this strategy around C++, and that's really exciting, and we're going to see some of that on the demo in just a second. And then you represent a cross-platform strategy. In just a couple words, what is that, Varun?
So I work in the C#.NET team.
Okay.
We're part of the larger Visual Studio organization. So I work with Xamarin to get them to get Xamarin solution integrated with Visual Studio, so that Visual Studio customers with .NET and C# skills are able to create these amazing native iOS, Android, and Windows applications. We also, since .NET is also going open source, we work very closely with Xamarin on their runtime aspects as well.
Okay.
We're very tightly coupled with respect to our .NET teams and the Visual Studio teams, so that Visual Studio and Xamarin can together provide a great experience.
Okay, so we've got native applications with C++, native applications with C# using Xamarin, and non-native applications. Is that right?
Yeah, hybrid applications is the term, yeah. And so I work on the team that loves all things JavaScript, really. So in the realm of mobile, you have mobile web, and so our team builds the Edge developer tooling. We also build the tooling for Apache Cordova in Visual Studio. And so really, the position that my team focuses on is how do we help enable JavaScript developers to be as productive as possible to extend their skill set to mobile. And so Apache Cordova is great for that, because in the same way with other cross-platform technologies, it allows you to share a lot of code across different platforms, but also a lot of skills that you may have already had from doing web development in the past.
Wonderful. Okay, Ankit, why don't we go ahead and get you up to the demo table right now. Ankit's going to show us a little bit about what his group is working on and the ability to do cross-platform C++, and even mentioned to some degree some Java.
Right. So I just have this one slide that I like to share before I start, just to provide context. Right. So you see the list here. This is the top 100 Android applications that you see. The color pink denotes apps using C++ there. So as I mentioned earlier, that C++ usage is common for really high quality apps. We're looking for that platform defining experience. Fluid animations for games. You're really talking about C++. So there's really some really popular apps here, Candy Crush or Skype or Minecraft, and they're written basically majority C++. And that's the scenario that we're targeting. The scenario where you have an 80%, 90% C++ code and using the same piece of code across these three platforms. So that's really the scenario there. And just to give a context, we started last year with 2015 RTM basically, and we started an experience for Android, iOS, and Windows. And this is a blog that we published with Halfbrick, which makes these really popular games. I'm sure you guys have played it. I mean, have you guys played Fruit Ninja or Jetpack Joy, right? I mean,
of course,
yeah. So these kind of apps are really written, using our technology now in Visual Studio. And again, we have internal apps like Minecraft, Office, and Bing Maps. Again, a SKU of Microsoft apps there that also leverage C++ today. So that's really the experience that we're targeting. And what we notice is that, some of these apps for that, services layer, they use Java. In the case of Android, when you're talking to the Facebook SDK or the Google SDK for ad services and so on. So they really had like some piece of Java code and they had C++ code. And what we noticed is that because of that, they still had to use two different IDEs. They had to use Visual Studio for their C++ experience, and they had to use Android Studio or Eclipse for their Java experience there.
And no developer likes that.
Yes, and once you start using two IDEs, there's two different build systems. You got to worry about maintaining these two things, and hence we starting with 2015 update 1 RTM, we now provide that Java experience as well. That really ties you and makes you a more engaged Visual Studio developer and a happier developer because you have to use one IDE that lets you do all that stuff there.
So I write my C++ code in Visual Studio, and I write my Java code in Visual Studio.
Exactly, yes.
All right.
So that's exactly what this is, and that's what I'm going to show you guys today.
All right.
So if there are questions, please let me know coming. So this is the first time we're showing this, so hopefully the demo gods are good today and everything works. So I actually don't see my screen, so let me duplicate here for a second. That's good. So essentially, what you're seeing here is Visual Studio, and all I have here in Solution Explorer is an app called More Teapots. So this is a pretty characteristic Android application. It has both Java and C++ code. And a lot of these apps essentially are in that model. And it's an OpenGL3 app. It's graphic intensive. A good platform that basically games can build on top of. So what you see here in the solution, there's two projects here. There's the native activity project, which contains all your C++ code. So that's all your C++ code here. If you take a look at the property pages here quickly, what you're doing here is you're building a dynamic shared library. So this is like a DLL on the Windows platform that contains all your C++ code. We've done all the work here to support the different properties that a user might want to change. For example, you can use a different Android API level. You can actually choose between multiple Clang or compiler tool sets like Clang or GCC. So this is all coming from the native development kit that Android provides for C++ development. So I'm not going to get into this a lot because we've done this in the past. But very, very quickly, if I bring up a file here just to show you some of the basic things that we have there, is you'll see that we have the entire experience. I mean, like there we go. That's just IntelliSense lighting up there, autocomplete, telling me what to do. If I actually go ahead and type something that's not right, it's going to squiggle that. So just as a demo for that, that's basically telling me that this particular type is not defined. So you can really use this experience, language server's experience, to author your C++ code. And this is all there. This has been there since RTM. You have other features here for code navigation that you can use. For example, I can go ahead and say that I want a peak definition. I can see the definition of source. I can say go to definition for source, and I'll go there. So all the language server experience that you guys are used to today for the Windows platform, all we've done is extended that now for the Android platform as well. So that's all been there before with RTM. And what's really new here that I was talking about earlier is that, as I mentioned, that these apps are written in a manner, especially in the Android platform, that they both have C++ and Java code. So what you'll see here in a second, once I get this right, is that there's two projects here. So as I said, like this was built in the C++ source. The packaging project is really responsible for building all your Java classes, and it has everything else like assets or other graphic content that you really need for your app. And this then actually builds the end-to-end Android application package file, which contains your C++ code, your Java code. You combine that together, you get a great app. So that's the story there from that perspective. And to show you guys the Java experience now, I'm going to bring up a Java source file here. So just bear with me for a minute for that. So I'm going to bring up this file here called moreapplication.java. And you'll see here that we have basic support here for colorization. This is Java code now. I'm going to go ahead and add some code so that you guys can see the experience that we have for...
Oh, look at that, IntelliSense in Java.
That's IntelliSense in Java lighting up there, right? Now, this is a question for the esteemed colleagues I have here. You see this is a package that I added for, accessing logging services. You see this is actually squiggled. Do you guys know why? It's a trick question.
I don't.
Jonathan. Word.
It's not included as a reference?
So, close. Very close. But so... I'm sorry?
You're not using that?
Absolutely, Jonathan. There you go. So you're not using this package. So in case you weren't Jonathan, you actually didn't know, we have actually IntelliSense here now to help you in that perspective. So you can see the IntelliSense experience lighting up here and telling you that this particular package is not being used, right? So I'm actually going to go ahead and use it,
These are some of the facilities that have long benefited, and it's been a mass benefit to folks when they're using a managed language like C# and when they're using
Yes.
more of a curated platform. But now the platform is so diversified, and there's so many languages that are welcome in, and then these features are still there, and that's kind of magical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the other part is, Java is a huge customer base, right? And also from a C++ perspective, initially as Android started, there was not much left for C++ developers. They didn't even support C++ at the start. It's only after API level 9 that I had support for C++ there.
Oh, wow.
Largely because of game engines and wanting to port their existing code, yada yada yada. So even today, till very recently, Android Studio, which is the platform IDE for Android, didn't have support for C++. So those guys were really struggling. I mean, when we showed them the demos about the debugging and the debugger breakpoint hitting, they're solved. There's not much we have to do there.
Yeah.
So, and when you combine this experience now with the Java experience that we're offering, it just makes that end-to-end story really, really crisp and solid that they want to use the product essentially.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to add some code here so that we actually go ahead and so I'll say inside on create. It's just adding a log message. It's very, very simple. And I'm going to say here connect demo 2015 and close my thing. And as soon as I do that, you can see the squiggle disappearing because now the package is being used, right? So that's just the IntelliSense experience there. But we also have everything else working here. I mean, for example, you can go ahead and say, go to definition on AI, and it'll actually take you there. So just the basic language services that you need to be productive in an IDE, the kind of productivity you expect from Visual Studio for Java is already there for Android developers as well. Next, I want to show you something that we haven't shown before. It's the debugging experience. So again, debugging is a key part of that editable debug cycle that every developer aims for. So I'm just going to set a couple of breakpoints here, and let's see what happens, right? So I already have the emulator running here in the background right here. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to press F5. So the other story is that our emulator is really fast. It's based on Hyper-V. It's x86. There's an awesome demo by Amanda. If you haven't seen it, you guys should catch that up. I'm hoping you guys saw that, or if it's running on the Mac, for example.
So how do they find that online?
I think you just watch the Connect video, and Amanda's,
so it was on
Amanda's
Connect
there.
yesterday by Amanda.
Yes, and that's really something that is worth watching. So in this case, obviously I'm running on a Windows platform, and while you guys weren't looking, the app actually built and it actually deployed on the emulator that was installed, and you can see that the breakpoint that I set was actually hit. And you can see the locals window light up here with all the context that it requires. For example, I can go into the super type here and look up something like, for example, this activity service, which I believe is a Java lang string, and you can now do that in Visual Studio. Everything else works here too, like a watch window, for example, and this object type called PM. You can look at the types there. The call stack works there as well, right? So that's really the experience that we enabled, and this is something new that we haven't really shown before in a demo. So this is the first time that we're actually demoing this.
Now in Visual Studio, I end up with a single solution, if you will, that has projects, some of which are C++ and some of which are Java, and they can work together? And
they can work together beautifully, yes. Okay. So essentially, it's about defining your end-to-end application, right? And I'm going to show you something after this as well, which builds on this story here. In this case, it's an Android app and has Java and C++. But we also allow, as I said, that our aim is to be that one C++ cross-platform IDE for mobile platforms, including iOS and Windows. So not only can you have Java and C++ for our projects as part of your solution, you can also have Objective-C and C++ and C# projects there as part of the same solution. So when you're targeting Windows or iOS for that matter, for those purposes. So that's the first demo that you had for you guys here, And again, this actually doesn't end here. I can still go ahead and debug my C++ code. So that's really easy. I just go to my startup project. In this case, this is the packaging project. And I just go on the debugging front, and I choose here. Currently, I'm doing Java-only code. I can choose C++, set a breakpoint in my C++ code, and I'm ready to go. So that's something that we're still thinking about. We don't have an experience today that you see a mixed call stack for these two languages.
Right.
So the user has to make that choice up front, whether he's debugging Java or C++ code.
That's not nearly as difficult a choice as choosing a different IDE, however.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. So it's definitely the easier choice to make versus choosing a different IDE. And again, it's very simple now. I've actually just changed the debugger for C++, and that actually didn't pick up, but it just works beautifully as well. So that's the first one. Something else that I want to show you is basically another project type, which goes again demonstrates some of the capabilities that we've added in Visual Studio to make it that one Visual C++ cross-platform IDE. So I'm going to create this project here from a template project. One of our most capable PMs, Marion, he built this in his part-time, so thanks to him that we're able to do this demo right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and open this app up. And if you look here, let me just go ahead and clean this up a little so it makes it easy.
Wow, look at there. So you talk about combining your projects in your solution. There's a whole bunch of them there.
Right. So absolutely. So you're absolutely right, Jeremy, here, right? So if you see this library, for example, here, let's just focus on this library portion for now. And let me actually just drag this here so you can see what's happening here. This library essentially has 3 projects. It has an Android project, it has an iOS project, and it has a Windows project. And all these projects essentially have a reference to this cross-platform code called OpenGL app.shared, which is this component right here. And you can see the iOS portion also has the same reference, and the Windows portion also has the same reference here. And this shared portion, what this is doing is that this contains all the C++ code. In this case, there is no platform-specific code. All the code that you have here is shared code. And this contains all the shared code, which is currently being shared across Windows, iOS, and Android, right? And you can build all that from VS, right? And then, I mean, in this case, in this case, you're building a library. So, for example, for the Android platform, you're currently building, again, a static library, I believe, in this case. You can see that on the journal section. You're building a static library in case of Android. In case of iOS, again, you're building a static library there, which is right here. And in case of Windows, again, you're building a static library there, which is then being used right here, which is then being used into these projects that I talked about earlier, which build the end-to-end applications. In this case, the Android application project takes that static library, prepares the end-to-end Android application package. Likewise, the iOS package takes that static library, prepares that end-to-end package. Same thing for Windows. And then you can debug and deploy from there. So that's really, one solution. You can target both iOS, Android, and Windows. That's the beauty of it. What do you guys think about this?
I think it's pretty exciting. If you're in the audience right now, you're watching Ankit show this, and some questions are coming to mind, I think that's great because we've anticipated that, and we would encourage you to drop some questions in the queue, and we'll be answering those shortly. So Ankit, why don't you come back and join us, and all 3 of us will, I'll leave it to you 3 masters. We'll be answering questions from you, the audience, about what you've seen there and what Varun is representing, that is the C# Xamarin strategy, and then what Jonathan is representing, that is the Cordova strategy. So without further ado, I say we jump right into questions. And see, the first question is from Andrew. How do I choose between using the Xamarin C# strategy versus the Cordova strategy? If those were my 2 choices, for whatever reason, maybe I've got developers that are skilled in those 2, and I can't afford to drop down to the C++ level. How do I choose between those 2?
I think the best answer we could give to that is whichever of the 2 is going to help you be more productive and achieve the quality of app that you want. Mm-hmm. It's not every day that we actually talk to folks that love both JavaScript and C#. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. Usually a lot of people are either very passionate about one or the other. So if you're comfortable with both, and I think Varun could answer this better, maybe it comes down to a question of the UI experience that you're looking for. With Apache Cordova, you can absolutely achieve a great mobile app experience, but it is not native. Yeah. And so that's one of the benefits that you get with Xamarin. And so that would be another consideration to have when evaluating the 2 if the productivity and skill set experience of the team was equivalent. Yeah. But if it wasn't, then usually when we talk with people, the biggest factor comes down to you want to share code, awesome. What platform is going to help you be more productive, get your app out there quicker, iterate faster with your customers and so forth. So
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jonathan covered most of it. I'll just add that in terms of the app experience, if you're building native apps today with iOS, Android native tools, and you have these multiple teams, 3 times the cost, but you really want that native experience where your app is compiled down to native code. Xamarin with Visual Studio, is a clear choice, for that. But in terms of, for your other applications, it's about skill set. If you have a lot of C#, .NET, developers, they can access Android, iOS, platform APIs, even using familiar C# code. Mm-hmm. I think that's the power with Cordova. if you are a skilled JavaScript developer and you know how to tune performance and things like that, and that's your day-to-day environment, and you're looking to transition to mobile, then that kind of becomes more attractive.
Now, I think that one of the reasons why Cordova is an attractive strategy is because some people already have websites, and Sarah asks the question, how do I share code between my website and my Cordova app? Since they're both running JavaScript, is that a reason? Is that a good thing?
That's a great reason. I would say if your mobile web app is already heavily client-side in the sense that the majority of your UI generation and user interaction is written in JavaScript, then you're going to have a really easy experience porting that to Cordova, in the sense that a Cordova app is effectively a web app that's running offline in a browser that then has additional capabilities to device APIs that you wouldn't have in a standard web app. That said, if your existing mobile web app is heavily on the server side, so you're generating a lot of your UI, PHP, there might be some transition that you have to do to just take that exact same code. But the CSS, the HTML, the JavaScript is all going to apply largely to both. And so that is one very attractive reason why people do choose Cordova, is because they say, hey, we need a mobile web presence. That's no question.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't mind having a presence in the app stores as well. And so what's the easiest solution for us to achieve that? And you can absolutely share a ton of code with Cordova. The only complication I would say is just there might be some refactoring you might have to do to accommodate the fact that you don't have a server element generating your UI in Cordova. But if you're already full Ajax, client-side, etc., then it'll be a very good experience.
And I think I'll add to that as well. Like, and just one more thing, I think, and these guys can correct me if I'm wrong there, but is like cost is a factor at all? Like sometimes cost is a factor if you're a startup. Cordova is technology that's free, right? I mean, you can actually use it. It doesn't cost anything. But Xamarin is a paid technology at this point. So I think if that's at all a factor for your business success, I mean, besides the technology reasons that Varun and Jonathan talked about, you might actually choose Cordova instead of Xamarin, or the other way around, depending upon which one you actually prefer.
That actually leads into the next question, but I'll let you follow on to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And one of the conversations I always get into with customers is, especially for startups and folks, consultants with smaller budgets. If you look at the fact that iOS, Xcode, Android Studio are free tools, and they look at the cost of using Xamarin with it, and I look at the cost of hiring developers. If you're doing 2 or 3 separate teams and hiring a lot of people, then if you're basically using Xamarin, you can cut down that cost significantly. Then paying few $1,000s for a Xamarin license with Visual Studio kind of pales in comparison.
Right.
You are able to achieve a lot more. So sometimes folks start to compare between iOS and Android free tools versus Visual Studio with Xamarin, but then I asked them to factor in. I asked them to factor in the cost they're saving by hiring a developer.
Right.
It's like hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you don't need to hire 6 developers, you can do with 3 or 4. You're saving $300,000 or more, and basically at that point, a few $1,000s for license costs kind of pales in comparison.
Sure. And actually, Ian asks for our next question, how far can I go in creating and deploying these cross-platform apps without spending any money?
I mean, to Ankit's point, Cordova is a great solution there. A lot of people use it for proof of concept, application development, V1, kind of if they need agility, they need low cost. The friction of using Cordova is very low, especially if you already know JavaScript. There's a ton of libraries in the ecosystem. There's great UI frameworks like Ionic that can help you be even more productive and get that close to native-like experience. And it's free. So the community is also very prolific. I mean, which for a lot of developers we talk to is a big deal. So if you have questions, you have issues, you find bugs with the product or any of the various tools that exist out there, you're going to get help. And so that also is a big deal in the having the support to go from creating the app to deploying it and getting assistance that's effectively also free.
I think that we recognize there are a lot of different kinds of developers that are developing code. You know, you might be working as part of a big team, and you've got all of those considerations, or you know, Ian might be developing on his own. And then it's not really a cost of a development team that he has to take into consideration. It is a cost of his tooling, and it's good that we've got all the options. I think that's kind of the mega theme, is that there are lots of options, a lot of different ways that you can do your development. Let's ask another question from Marcus. Do I need to know about native platforms in order to build with Xamarin?
That's a great question. So in terms of Xamarin and Visual Studio Platform, you do have two options. One option is to use native UI designers for native platform for iOS, Android, and Windows. In that kind of scenario, you basically need to know how to use those native designers. You also have an option of Xamarin Forms, where you can create one UI which sort of replicates natively across different platforms. So in terms of knowledge, like how much native knowledge you really need, in my experience, I would say not as much, but it's not
None.
Because you are creating, what you're looking to do as a developer, you're creating apps that look native, that basically appeal to somebody who uses apps on that platform only. Like if your customer using iOS apps only and they're used to that environment. So if you're looking for that kind of experience, you need to kind of have some understanding of how different user interfaces work on iOS, but you don't need to pay the cost of developing them separately in different tools. One other aspect where you kind of save on your native knowledge is the fact that Xamarin also provides C# APIs for all the platform APIs. So if you're looking, the coolest thing is that you can access camera for iOS on an Android device using your C# interface. And that's like amazingly productive.
And that's not just part of the native features that are available and that are mapped through Xamarin, it's all of them, right?
Exactly. So Xamarin platform provides 100% access to native APIs because they've automated this process. And for last, some customers ask me that iOS comes out with a version every 6 months and new APIs, how long does it take for Xamarin to do it? And Xamarin has done same-day support for last 7 years.
Wow.
So it's same day, and it's not a statement. They have done it over and over again because it's so important for developers to have access to all those APIs on day one. And they've automated this process through tools that are publicly available. So that's why you do need some knowledge of how these apps behave natively, but you can reuse most of your C# Visual Studio knowledge therein.
Yeah. Okay, so for our next question, now, Ankit, I believe this is going to be for you. Karen actually asks, what if my application has a majority of C++ code, but then some Java and Objective-C code? Can I still use Visual Studio for my mobile application? And I'm going to bring you the next question as well, because I believe the answer to that question is yes, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so then as a follow-on, Anoop asks, why should I use C++ for my cross-platform mobile targeting? So feel free to answer kind of both of those.
So, I mean, I think like there's two aspects to it, right? So I'll answer the second one first, and I'll go into the question that Karina really asked, right? So the story is this, right? You take a look at any platform that's there, whether that's Windows, whether that's Android, whether that's iOS, right? There's really, like, each platform essentially has 2 or 3 languages that the company or the platform really supports. Like, for example, in the platform ID, like Xcode, they support Swift, they support Objective-C, they support C++.
Right.
In the platform ID for Windows, we have support for C# and C++ and JavaScript as well. In the platform ID for Android Studio, they support Java and C++, right? So the C++ remains that common denominator.
Right.
So that's the first thing, is that it's supported by by each of these companies and each of these platforms natively. So that's the first one. The second one is that now Java is a great language and Objective-C is a great language, but without some of the other solutions that are out there, by default, they're not really cross-platform. So if you write that feature in Java or Objective-C, you have to go rewrite it for Windows or likewise, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're using C++, you can really write that feature just once and then reuse it on all these three platforms. It really cuts down your development cost. The third reason is really performance, right? When you're talking about games, right? Games is a big one here. You're talking about some of the really platform differentiating games, right? There's a lot of games out there. There's 1.5 million apps on the Android App Store. There's 1.5 million apps on the iOS App Store. How do I write an app that is going to be more polished, more professional, provide a platform-defining experience? The answer is C++, right? So to recap there, cross-platform is one. Natively supported by each platform. In the Android case, you have Android NDK, which has APIs that you can call to access the Android OS itself. And the last one is performance. The trouble, however, to Kieran's question has been that today you had to use 3 different IDEs in the past. You had to use Xcode, you had to use Android Studio, and you had to use Visual Studio for Windows. Mm-hmm. And starting with 2015 RTM, there's no need to do that anymore. We're going to solve that problem for you using Visual Studio. So that's why you should use Visual Studio there.
Awesome. Cool. That was good information. This one's a little bit more philosophical. I imagine that each of you will have some input on this. But in this new world, developers have a lot more options. Is that a good thing? Now there used to be like 1 or 2 or 3 ways to get done what you wanted to get done, and now there's 175 different ways to get done what you want to get done. How does a developer know which way to go, which platform to choose, which language to choose?
Yeah, I think coming from the web space, we have this debate a lot because there's a new JavaScript framework every day and it supposedly replaces the previous. Mm-hmm. And I think there's definitely pros and cons to having options. The con is that it can become tiring to keep up with the noise. But I think the pro, which in my opinion outweighs that, is those choices are either complementary, which I think in the case of the three of us, really it would be hard to say that any of these solutions for cross-platform are better in general than the others, but they have strengths and weaknesses that make them necessary to exist. And then I think having options help each of the other options get better, right? Because as they learn new capabilities or new developer experiences, a lot of that influence, I think, tends to make its way, into other things. And so from my perspective, at least philosophically, I think options are good. And so it's kind of up to each developer to figure out, well, what are their priorities to help kind of filter out some of the options so that they don't end up spending all their time trying to just make a choice versus doing what's important and building a great, awesome app that, solves people's problems.
Yeah, I'll just add another dimension to this. If you look at all these solutions, at the end of the day, these solutions basically roughly fall into 3 buckets that existed before: web, JavaScript, using a higher level programming language like C#, and third one, C++. We always had these, and a lot of developers loved writing websites. Some developers loved writing apps which were using C# on desktop as well, and C++ apps, games, have always, a lot of times, have used C++. So world kind of, even though there are a lot of vendors, a lot of things out there, but in terms of technologies, I think they roughly follow a fairly similar pattern. Mm-hmm. And I think, as Jonathan pointed out in his previous answer, you need to dig back, like what's the core skill set?
What are the concepts?
Yes, what are the core skill set, concepts that you're familiar with and kind of looking to pick. However, I think another big thing that has happened is, consumers are just using apps, a lot of apps. And at the end of the day, another dimension is that what is the experience that's needed for your business? Yeah. What kind of experience is demanded by the consumer? Like, for example, as Ankit was describing, games, your customers expect fluid, fast performance. 1 millisecond when a shot is being fired, matters. It shouldn't be that you fire a shot and bullet takes a little bit further, right? That matters. So when you are picking your tool, it's also about enabling that great experience that's going to sell your app, that's going to further your business. In terms of native apps, in some cases you may be a web developer, but your customers really need that cutting edge, like mixed radio, for example. There's a lot of competition in radio apps, and for apps which are competing in consumer space, they really need that native experience. So you've got to find, in that case, what is going to get you that native experience. So there are two dimensions to summarize. One is, what is your skill set, and make choice based on that. But also, more importantly, what experience is important for your business. Both of those.
And I think I'll touch on one thing. So you covered skill set, and I think you covered experience, right? The last thing I think I'll add to those great answers, is time to market, right? So here am I today, and what is my time to market to get my app to the App Store, right? If you're a web developer and you had a website and you want to write an app really, really quick, maybe you use your existing experience and skill set, Cordova. You have an enterprise who basically has a lot of C# code. I want to take that app and make it run on iOS and Android. Guess what? I'm not going to rewrite 80% of code that's been written in the last 10 years. It's hard. It takes time. So what's my answer there, Xamarin? And in the case of C++, it's the same thing with game engines, or also enterprise apps, right? You're not going to write Adobe PDF Reader from scratch, or in case of game engines like Unreal or Cocos, which are really popular game engines, you're not going to just rewrite them in another language. So it's really time to market is the other thing I'll add there, depending upon where you're at and where you want to go. So that's really the only thing.
That's great. Now, we all know that on the Android platform specifically, sometimes it's difficult with the fracturing, with the various versions and stuff. How do these various strategies that we have for making cross-platform apps deal with the various versions of Android?
Gonna go. Cordova is probably great answer.
I mean, I don't know whether any of these cross-platform solutions particularly shield you completely from the fragmentation of Android, just because there's a lot of devices and a lot of versions and API sets, and so nothing's unfortunately going to replace just testing your app against the device capabilities and versions that you expect your end users to be on.
Okay.
That said, because in the Cordova world, you're, of the three solutions, maybe the most abstracted from the actual native platform, you're not having to worry about if-def checking for what version of Android you're on, because you're consuming plugins or browser capabilities that are doing the support behind the scenes for you to make sure that
we already tested.
They've been tested very well, and so that's great. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of variations in the versions of the WebView control on different versions of Android, even between device vendors. And so regardless whether you have to expect your code to behave differently on different versions of Android, you really do still need to test them against the devices that you expect your users to be on.
Yeah, I'll just say that if you talk to any native Android developer, there's a lot of pain, managing all of this. I would say that the pain gets a lot more lower when you're using one of these technologies, because underlying, for example, in case of Xamarin, you're using Mono, the open source .NET for Linux, and what happens, you're using a lot of those APIs, and those guys are the Mono guys, they're testing their stuff underneath with all of this. So using one piece that's being tested rather than kind of directly using stuff which breaks all the time. So you get that kind of abstraction where you can kind of depend that, okay, these guys have tested their stuff across platforms. So the pain gets a lot more lower. That case.
I think the only thing I'll add there, right? I mean, and I'll be biased to what I was offering. I'm here to sell the C++ bucket, so we will bias there. But essentially, if you program your code, one of the things with fragmentation that causes issues is screen sizes, right? So if you have a Samsung Galaxy S6 versus an HTC One or some other Android phone, the screen sizes are different. So your UI, for example, renders differently, the buttons appear differently. So you really have to test your UIs in addition to being able to test your core technology. And if you're using C++ and you programmed well enough and you're using OpenGL, then you kind of like scale for those different screen sizes much easier than in XML, where you're basically having multiple layouts defined. So that is some of the ease there. And I think the other solutions that Warren was talking about, Xamarin, right? I mean, Xamarin has Xamarin Test Cloud, which offers you the ability to be able to do vast testing across a huge variety of devices, right? So I think it depends. I mean, I think there's nothing. I don't think there's a silver bullet to that answer. But I think depending upon your programming style, depending on your implementation, you could choose either way. And one thing that we really noticed talking to a lot of customers during the exercise that we did recently, we did this Moneywell exercise to reach out to a lot of Android developers, is that people really care about the top 20 or 10 devices. Like, so if it's like the top 10 Android devices probably cover like 60% of the market there, like if you're talking about certain countries, right? So if you test on those, they kind of like just leave it at that. And then Google provides services for selective rollout for your features, where people will roll out their features selectively. And if it stops working on this device, then they'll go and get that device at that point in time, add it to their test bucket and test harness, and then go from there. So essentially, those are the kind of solutions that we've seen for fragmentation there. And definitely your programming style and technology that you choose, whether that's Xamarin, Cordova, or C++, or Java XML for Android, will help there as well.
Okay. Now for my next question, this one comes from George. And we are sitting here roughly in order of abstraction. C++ is obviously the lowest level, and JavaScript, you're working on top of a web engine, so the Cordova is sitting on top of an engine here. And then C# is a managed language. It's somewhere in the middle. And one thing that George is wondering, and maybe some others are as well, is specifically in the instance of Xamarin, are we really talking about native performance here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess the main thing to understand here is that traditionally for .NET applications, we had a CLR, a runtime, which was sort of an abstraction layer.
Sure.
In case of the Xamarin platform and Windows 10 universal applications, the technology that's being used is where when you build your app, instead of leaving it at intermediate code, we compile it to native.
Okay.
So basically, if you were to take an iOS application, you build it using Xcode, you compile it. It will compile it to native code, whether you write in Swift or Objective-C. Xamarin with Visual Studio provides the same experience. The app is compiled to pure native code. There's no difference. So when you think in terms of these compelling applications for Formula One or other consumer applications, performance and user experience is an integral part of their business, right? And since these apps compile to native, true native, they're able to achieve equivalent performance for these apps.
Wonderful. Okay. There's a very common question that comes to the Cordova space, and that is this Cordova thing. I've heard of PhoneGap. Is that the same thing? What's the difference?
Yeah, I was just talking with somebody about that yesterday. It even confuses me sometimes. No, so Cordova started its life as PhoneGap.
Okay.
That was the original product that then became an open source project, contributed to the Apache Foundation, and was renamed Cordova. PhoneGap itself still exists, and you can kind of think of it as a distribution of Cordova, almost kind of like a distribution of the Linux kernel.
Gotcha.
And so there's a standard set of technologies under the covers that make hosting a website on mobile possible, bridging native capabilities to JavaScript possible, and all those things are standard between the two.
Okay.
But PhoneGap has some additional services and tooling that they layer on top of Cordova and distribute as
So both
PhoneGap.
can take the same plugins as well?
Exactly right, yep.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. Is the Java experience, Ankit, this one comes from Skyonix, is the Java experience limited to creating Android applications?
Yes. Today, the experience is limited to be able to create only Android apps there. But if you follow our blog, there's enough hints there to do other stuff, so I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. So go check out that blog.
Yeah.
That'd be good. What is it possible to use Swift for iOS there? So I think in the same solution when you're sitting on a C++ shared library.
Right, so absolutely. So in the sense that, I mean, it's the same. So what we do for the iOS store is that because of the legal stuff that iOS allows and does not allow, you still have to build the app on the Mac using the Apple tools itself.
Okay.
So what we do is that think of Visual Studio as a remote that allows you to, you're watching TV and VS is the remote that where when you hit build, what really happens is that we take your iOS sources, we copy that over to the Mac, we build it there, we'll deploy it to a device there and so on. So, I mean, our templates don't currently support Swift out of the box, but if you have Swift code in there, there's no reason why it won't build and just work out of the box there as well. Mm-hmm. So yes, if you're in that scenario, then it would definitely support that as well.
Okay, great. I think one of the big values of this panel specifically is the fact that you guys all represent such disparate strategies. And so I'm trying to find questions and pull out questions that really take advantage of that. And Michael asks, if I wanted to develop an open world iOS game that had high graphics and co-op gameplay, which of these programming languages or which of these strategies would you recommend for that? And by the way, Michael is working solo, so one of our independent developers.
So I think it depends is the answer. Now
I was expecting that.
If I was alone in a room, then the answer might be different. But no, I think it depends upon what skill set he has. I mean, especially in iOS, like in terms of native performance, Objective-C is a very performant language. Swift is catching up fast as well. C++ is a solution. You could use some of the apps inside Microsoft. I know for gaming also use Xamarin as an approach. JavaScript is catching up really fast in terms of performance as well. So I mean, if that's really, I think you can use any of those three technologies. So I'll let you guys answer that one.
How about Unity?
So Unity is there too. Yeah.
Yeah. So Unity is really popular for making games, and I think the main aspect here is, which I encourage folks to consider, is in this market, you really want to target multiple platforms. Mm-hmm. So, like, I often talk to folks who were like, oh, we needed to get quickly, so we just did iOS, and we hired a couple of iOS Objective-C developers, or I am an Objective-C developer, so I just did it myself. And now, they're making money on it, but they're not on other stores, right? So what I'll encourage is the Objective-C comparison is interesting. It is definitely a performant language, but think about cross-platform from the beginning, because that's going to come. That's going to catch up with you sooner than later. So Unity is also a great option. It's very popular for developers who are looking to build games. You can use C# as well, and .NET C# team partners very closely with Unity as well.
And the good thing with Unity is written in C++.
Yeah.
Add that there.
Just throw that in there.
Just throw that in there.
I would absolutely make the Unity recommendation as well.
Yeah.
If there was a strong affinity to JavaScript and you were very comfortable and that was something that you wanted to go after, then you can absolutely do games in Cordova. Mm-hmm. But if the experience is the most important thing and code sharing as well, then Unity is going to give you a lot of the benefits we've been talking about today and achieve an amazing experience. Their community is awesome, so that's a great option for that.
I think like one of the funny things that we heard during our exercise that we're doing, this Moneyball exercise, talking to customers, was that they would make the iOS app first, then they'll make the Android app, and they said that by the time we got to Windows, the app was perfect. So
yeah.
I mean, so it's really builds into the point that Warren was talking about earlier about cross-platform, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of games end up not really, at the end of the day, having a whole lot of business logic or data connections, and interactions, transactions, things like that. And so you can use a classic game engine, and it fits the bill perfectly. But as soon as you start introducing some business logic and coordinating with individuals and having a user experience and stuff like that, then you might need to require one of these.
Makes sense.
App engines. Okay, well, I think we have done it. I think we've taken a record number of questions from the audience. And I thank you guys very much for being here and for telling us a little bit of a recap of what was announced yesterday in this fire hose of information, and specifically what was announced in your guys' areas. Continue to push things forward as you are. And thank you very much for having these touch points with the audience. The public developers really, the folks in our audience today really enjoy having you guys as touch points and being able to interact with the teams, if you will. So
this has been great.
Yeah.
All right. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of Connect Day 2.
Thank you for having us.